My onion harvest was less than bountiful, but a success nonetheless. Welcome to my high desert homestead, where I only use about 400 gallons of water each week in an attempt to build a frugal and sustainable homestead. Earlier in spring, I planted 576 onions on my little homestead. Historically, I've harvested around 150 pounds of produce each year, and this year I decided to push my gardening out onto the homestead, outside of the greenhouses, and I spread myself a little too thin. I've never brought in any amendments, and I've made 100% of my compost and soil here on the homestead. So there are two main reasons that I didn't have a larger onion harvest. At the end of this video, please check out my free ultimate guide to starting an off-grid frugal homestead. And if you need more advice on how to develop your homestead, book a video consultation so we can speak face-to-face and save 15% with code FRUGALOFFGRID. When I moved off-grid, I did so with the intention of learning exactly how far I can push myself and my homestead. What if the economy collapsed and I was out here completely alone? Could I do this without sourcing things like soil from out of town? While you could easily haul in tons of soil and compost and get started tomorrow with a phenomenal garden, I wanted to create all of this from scratch just to see if I could do it myself. Long story short, you absolutely can. It's simply taking years for me to do this. I've had to get livestock to get manure. I've had to create compost, get the compost hot, break down all of these different piles of compost, and it takes a lot of compost and amendments to fill the gardens, hugelkultures, and berms around the homestead so that I can create a fluffy, nutrient-dense soil to grow produce in. So reason number one that I didn't have a huge onion harvest is my soil is not quite fluffy enough yet for root vegetables. The largest part of my success has been melons like vine peach and cantaloupe and honeydew, and squash like spaghetti squash, pumpkin, and summer squash. My soil is just not quite there yet for root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and apparently onions. That being said, I learned a really valuable lesson, and I'm very grateful to have hundreds of fairly small onions. And the second reason that I didn't have a huge onion harvest is I spread myself too thin with water management. I'm only using about 400 gallons a week on my homestead, and that's because I don't have a well, I do haul water, and I rely largely on rainwater harvesting. Currently, I'm pushing towards 20,000 gallons of ability to harvest and store rainwater. I plan to double that to 40,000 gallons, so even if there's a drought for a few years, I would have enough water to last me for 3 years. The only way I'd really know how much garden I can afford to water is to expand my garden and push it to the max. And I found out that, well, I pushed it a little too far, and these areas outside of the greenhouses might be better if they relied solely on a rain harvesting pond, and the 400 gallons a week, if I focused completely on the greenhouses with that, I would have definitely had a huge yield. In fact, I have about 20 or 30 onions that are much larger because they're in areas where I was able to get more water. So inside the greenhouse here, this is where I'm harvesting onions from. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough water to keep the onions on the hugelkultures or in the geothermal thriving. So let's take a look at what I did harvest with a garden that I really didn't water that much. This is about 4 months after I planted the onions, and I'm only pulling up onions that are pretty well dead up top. You can see just how dry the soil is, although I've done my best to amend it to hold moisture. It still needs to be improved upon, and well, soon I'll pull out this entire garden, and I have a lot more compost and amendments that I'll throw in, and I do believe that, well, this next year will be even that much better. So a lot of these onions are pretty small. Most of the onions are a little larger than my thumb, I would say. And some of them are quite a bit larger. And the onions that I'm leaving in for now, they're approaching a standard-sized onion. This onion, in example, is still alive. So I'm going to leave it, and it will be a full-sized onion. I do have 10 tomato plants, which although they haven't gotten a lot of water either, I have been more careful to be sure that they get enough to at least grow a fair amount. Here's my absolutely stunning onion haul. I am positive that there are many skilled gardeners out there that are extremely impressed and will bag these up so that I can cure them, dry them, and, well, I'll use them for dinner. I planted red onions in the geothermal, and they're all dead. So, luckily I was able to get quite a few white onions and candy yellow onions. Being completely transparent, I was pretty sure that I wouldn't do phenomenal. I know that I need to build my soil up because I haven't had a huge amount of luck with potatoes or other root crops. In fact, I got some potatoes by accident. But I prepared by getting a bunch of these sacks so I could bag up the onions just in case I did have a large harvest. And of course, I'll be able to use them for other things around the homestead. I weighed out half-pound bags of onions and came up with, well, about 3 pounds total. I decided to bag them up and hang them in the closet in my camper van, which is where I live, so that they can dry out slowly and safely and cure so that I can cook with them. I think someone could easily consider this a failure, but in my case, I learned a lot. The fact that I have hundreds of onions, and the fact that I will have about 30 full-sized onions, not to mention this is the most onions I've ever harvested in my life, I consider it a win, and I'm happy to share with you guys how my onion harvest turned out and what I could have done better. What are you waiting for? Check out my free ultimate guide to off-grid living. I seriously packed in 4 years of knowledge for you guys for free, so go check it out and subscribe if you'd like to learn more about my homestead.